You felt it before. That moment when someone says something completely mundane, but something inside you jolts, as if you've heard it before, though you haven't. A flicker of familiarity, a word you can't quite place, a phrase that makes your ears ring, your stomach turn, your mind stop just long enough to feel something shift. For most, it's dismissed as déjà vu, a glitch in memory, a misfire in the brain. But what if it isn't? What if what you felt wasn't your memory being fooled, but being accessed across multiple continents, among unrelated cultures, and etched into surfaces separated by oceans and time? A pattern has emerged. A series of symbols and phonetic fragments that don't belong to any known language. Not lost tongues like Aramaic or Sumerian, not even speculative constructs like Enochian or the language of the birds. This one seems to write itself, to insert itself into other languages, to arrive without origin. Linguists first noticed it in the margins, literally. Strange recurring notations in the corners of ancient texts, always written in different handwriting than the original author. In dreams, people report hearing words they can't remember but wake up trying to pronounce anyway. In neurological patients, stroke survivors and those suffering from migraines describe writing symbols they've never seen before, perfectly repeating forms found on Neolithic cave walls. But here's the problem. None of these people knew each other. None of them had access to the same source materials. And yet, they all reproduce the same fragments. Worse, when those fragments are read aloud, something changes in the air. A stillness, a pressure behind the eyes. And if someone else is nearby, they often stop what they're doing and look at you. Not confused, not alarmed, just recognizing. As if something ancient inside them heard its own name. This isn't just a language you learn. It's a language that learns you. Welcome to Tales from the Forbidden Library. Some books teach us things we never knew. Others remind us of things we were never meant to forget. But this one writes itself inside your memory and waits for the moment you accidentally say it out loud. It began as coincidence. At least, that's what the academics called it at first. A linguistic anomaly. Scattered carvings on the walls of Paleolithic caves in Spain, identical to etchings found in ceremonial relics uncovered in the jungles of Borneo, thousands of miles apart. Tens of thousands of years in difference, but somehow, same stroke patterns, same shapes, same flow. They weren't pictographs. They weren't decorative. They followed no linear script, no known syntax, but they had structure, a rhythm to their form, as if they weren't written for the eyes, but for something else, for resonance, for memory, for triggering something we no longer know how to hear. The first to take it seriously was Dr. Marina Oakland, a field linguist studying the drift of proto-languages across Mesopotamian trade routes. She discovered what she believed to be non-random glyphs scratched onto the base of a clay tablet. Symbols that, to her horror, mirrored not Akkadian or Ugaritic, but a string of impressions she'd once sketched from a dream as a child. She hadn't seen that dream in over 2 decades, but the symbols had waited, quietly, perfectly. From there, the pattern unraveled. A museum archivist in Estonia found similar symbols etched into the underside of a fossilized jawbone. A linguist in Tokyo received a child's drawing in the mail sent by mistake, which contained fragments of the same alphabet, rendered in crayon. And perhaps most disturbing of all, a mental patient in São Paulo began speaking in a language that no staff member recognized. They recorded her, translated nothing. But when the audio was accidentally played in the break room, a janitor, who had no formal education, stood up, eyes glazed, and began humming a tune no one else could hear. It wasn't just writing anymore. The language had rhythm, cadence. It moved like music, except no one had taught it, no one had created it. And yet it spoke through every medium: stone, sound, sketch, even sleep. One experimental researcher tried to map the locations where this language appeared, on walls, in reports, in symbols on skin from spontaneous scars or birthmarks, and what he found was staggering. The distribution followed no trade route, no migration path. It was too scattered to be evolution, too precise to be random. It didn't spread, it emerged, like it was surfacing through people, through places, through thought. Even skeptics began to notice a chilling side effect among those who spent too long decoding the fragments. They began to dream in it, not just in symbols or phrases, but in full sentences, whispered by people they'd never seen, in locations they'd never visited. Some woke up unable to describe what they heard, only able to repeat the sound. Others found strange markings scribbled on the walls beside their beds. One woman reported speaking a sentence to her husband while half asleep, and watching him freeze in place, tears running down his face. He said he didn't know what she'd said, but he'd heard his mother say it to him the night before she died, and then there was the déjà vu. It started subtle. Hearing someone say something and feeling like it had already happened, like they were reciting a script you hadn't realized you knew. But over time, it intensified. People started experiencing full moments of repetition, not memory, but mirrored awareness, as if a line of this language, once heard or spoken, could bend time around it. As if reality paused to make room for the phrase, like a breath being held across dimensions. Researchers gave it a name: autoglottogenesis, the self-born tongue, a language that wasn't created, but arrived. One that didn't evolve, but revealed itself. And if that's true, the question isn't just where did it come from, it's who or what is trying to speak through us. At first it seemed harmless, an ancient curiosity, a code perhaps, buried in our collective unconscious. But the deeper researchers went, the more the language began to change. Not in structure, but in behavior. Because languages, as we understand them, are passive tools. They require a speaker, a listener, an intent. But this one began responding. The first clear instance occurred during an experiment in Zurich. A linguistics AI was trained on the fragments, fed every available symbol, structure, and phonetic guess compiled from hundreds of global sources. Its task was to extrapolate likely grammar rules and produce theoretical sentences. For 3 days, the program remained inert, generating nonsense. Then suddenly, without input, it produced a sentence. It wasn't gibberish. It was a phrase, roughly translated, "I see you now." The programmers assumed it was a coincidence, until the lights flickered in the lab. Until the sound recording system, which had not been activated, captured a low-frequency hum matching the harmonics found in cave recordings from Spain. And until the youngest intern, who'd been present the entire time, collapsed into a seizure while whispering words no one recognized, words later identified as variants of the same language. This was not the only case. In Oslo, a patient undergoing deep brain stimulation to treat a speech disorder began uttering sequences that startled his neurologist. Not because they were unfamiliar, but because she'd seen them in a dream the night before. A dream she hadn't told anyone about. When they played back the recording, audio engineers noticed something uncanny. The background hiss of the microphone aligned with faint whispers layered into the white noise, matching the patient's words seconds before he spoke them. It was as if the language wasn't just emerging, it was anticipating, responding, mirroring its speakers before they spoke. And for some, it went further. They began to feel as though their thoughts were no longer entirely their own. One poet in Lisbon, known for her spontaneous writing style, began waking up to find pages of verses she didn't remember composing. Lines written in her own hand, in her usual ink, in perfect meter, but composed entirely of phonemes no known alphabet could replicate. She said the phrases came to her through sensation, not sound, as if a meaning had been pressed into her skin and translated through her nerves. She wasn't the only one. A group of students in Kazakhstan, studying comparative mythology, began seeing hallucinated glyphs superimposed over text, symbols no one else in the classroom saw. At first they thought it was stress, but then they started drawing them, sharing them, and the moment one of them tried to say it aloud, the air in the room changed. The projector burst. 3 students passed out, and one of them never woke up. The coroner called it a spontaneous aneurysm. The surviving students say it was the moment they spoke a word that wasn't meant to be heard. Patterns like these kept surfacing. People who spoke the language by accident, mumbling in sleep, echoing phrases in media they didn't consciously register, often experienced a moment of what researchers called linguistic inversion. Instead of using the language to express a thought, the language began using them to express itself. And always, the same phrase appeared again and again, "I see you now." It was no longer a mystery with an answer. It was a presence with intention. Some now believe this is not a language in the traditional sense at all, not communication, but manifestation, a structure through which something on the other side of perception is pushing through, something that doesn't speak in ideas or voices, but in resonance. And the more we try to interpret it, the clearer its form becomes. Like fog taking shape the longer you stare into it, like a voice rehearsing itself through your throat. And the scariest part? It doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you to say it. Somewhere along the line, it stopped being a theory. The language was no longer just studied, it was being felt. And not just by scholars or those who had read the symbols. People who had never seen the carvings, never heard the recordings, began dreaming of phrases they couldn't repeat. They'd wake up mouthing sounds that left a strange taste, as if their bodies had spoken something metallic. Their memories would warp around the moment, twisting dreams into déjà vu into dread. A woman in Istanbul described a moment where her daughter, barely 3 years old, turned to her mid-sentence and said a phrase she didn't understand. The child's voice deepened, eyes glazed, then returned to normal, blissfully unaware of what had just been said. The mother recognized the final syllable. She had seen it years ago, carved into a stone wall on a hiking trip in Nepal, a symbol that looked like a spiral folding inward. She never mentioned it to anyone. And yet her daughter had spoken it. That was the first time she felt afraid of her own child. More reports emerged. People speaking a word and watching those nearby pause, not confused, but shaken. Not because they knew what was said, but because something deep inside them reacted. One man said the moment he heard it, he remembered his grandmother's funeral, even though he hadn't been there. Another claimed the word triggered an exact memory of a field he'd never visited, yet could now describe down to the scent of the flowers and the shape of the clouds. Something was happening, something collective. The word, whatever it was, didn't just carry meaning, it carried memory. Not personal memory, but ancestral, archetypal, embedded in bloodlines and bone. A root tongue, perhaps, from before tongues existed. From before sound was shaped into thought. Some believe it's not a language at all, that it's a seed, not of knowledge, but of self. A mechanism for something to take root inside us, slowly, silently, word by word. Until one day, we don't just recognize the language, we remember it, as if we once spoke it, as if it was stolen from us, and now it's coming back. Through our dreams, our writings, our mistakes. Through the slips of the tongue and the strange gaps in memory, where meaning flickers without words. A group of researchers began compiling these words, trying to build a lexicon, but no two fragments ever translated the same way. For some, a phrase meant protection. For others, the same sounds induced a panic attack. The words were not fixed. They adapted to the speaker, bent themselves around what the listener feared, or desired, or deserved. It wasn't translation. It was revelation. And then came the final incident. A podcast host, known for exploring ancient religions, jokingly read one of the fragments on air. Just 5 syllables. The episode was taken down within hours, not by the platform, but by the host himself, who showed up at a hospital incoherent, muttering the same 5 syllables on loop. When asked why he'd pulled the show, he only said, "It heard me." Since then, no one who's spoken the full phrase has remained unchanged. Some vanish, some lose parts of themselves, memories, identities, even names, as if something reclaims the moment it's recognized. And maybe that's the truth. Maybe the language didn't invent itself at all. Maybe it was waiting to be spoken again, to be remembered, to become a mirror, not of what we say, but of what we are beneath the silence. What began as an anomaly, an unexplained glyph on a stone, a phrase muttered in sleep, has become something far more unsettling. Not a mystery to be solved, but a presence to be reckoned with. A thread woven through time, space, and thought, invisible until noticed, and irreversible once understood. We call it a language because that's the closest word we have. But it doesn't behave like one. It doesn't wait to be learned. It isn't built from rules or logic or even meaning. It acts more like a parasite, or perhaps a symbiote. One that doesn't feed on flesh, but on cognition. One that finds fertile ground not in soil, but in silence. The silence inside your mind. The space between thoughts, where instinct lives. And once it plants itself, it grows. Not quickly, not violently, just patiently, quietly, like ivy, like fungus, like memory. You'll think you're dreaming more vividly, hearing things, seeing patterns in books, in names, in conversations. You'll get chills when someone says something ordinary, because it sounds familiar, though you've never heard it. You'll find yourself finishing people's sentences, not because you're clever, but because something inside you already knew what they were going to say. That's how it starts. Not with words, with echoes. And eventually with recognition. Because this isn't just a story about a tongue that taught itself to exist. It's a story about something trying to come back. Through our mouths, our hands, our writing. Through the need we all feel to explain the unexplainable. Through our hunger for meaning, for symbols, for connection. The ancient cave carvings, the dreams, the linguistic anomalies. They're not proof of a message. They're footprints. Clues that we've been here before, that the language already bloomed once and was buried, forgotten, sealed away not by accident, but by force.